When I was a kid, we lived a little bit out in the country. I was 12 at the time of this story, and would often be out in the front yard or driveway. Our yard was big, and the driveway was long. I was always playing basketball or something like that. So one afternoon, I was towards the end of the driveway where our hoop was, and I was practicing. Now, out of nowhere, I remember hearing this music playing in the distance. I didn't even know what it was at first. Then I looked and saw this ice cream truck coming from around the corner. And this truck looked really old and beat up. It wasn't one of the really nice ones, but one that you would immediately think looked suspicious or creepy. When I saw it, I turned and started running away. To that point, I don't think that I had ever seen an ice cream truck come down our street in my entire life. That's how far out in the country we were. Any car coming down the street would make me suspicious. I knew as I was running away that it was likely nothing bad, but for some reason I just felt the need to run. So it took me a little while to get up our long driveway, and by the time I got back in front of the house, I stopped to watch the truck. I expected to see it pass by our house, and I was curious why an ice cream truck was even on our street. Except, I noticed that when the truck got in front of our driveway, it just stopped. Now, at this point, I was standing near this large tree, about 10 feet away from our house, and I was watching. I then moved behind the tree and continued to watch. The ice cream truck had stopped right in front of our driveway, blocking it entirely. I was confused as to why it had stopped and who was driving it. I waited there and kept watching. About 2 or 3 minutes went by. I felt like I was in a standoff with the truck. The driver had to have seen me running up the driveway as it approached. Then, finally, I saw the truck start to back up. I felt relieved for a second and thought that it was leaving, but I was still a little bit confused as to why it was backing up and not just driving forward. That's when the truck started to turn, and after it did, the truck went forward and started entering our driveway. When I saw the truck coming up the driveway, I ran for the house. I got inside as fast as I could and then locked the door behind me. I ran around trying to find my parents. When I finally did, I told them what was happening. We went to a front window and looked out, but by then, the truck was completely gone. I didn't know what happened to it, but I guessed that the guy finally drove away. After that, I never saw the ice cream truck again. In fact, after that occurred, I don't think that I ever saw any kind of ice cream truck on our street. So that's the only time I'm aware of an ice cream truck of any kind ever coming down our street, and it was one of the most strangest and suspicious things that I've ever seen as well. It still creeps me out when I think about it to this day. I don't know who was driving that truck or why they even went down our street. Why would they stop in front of the driveway and then start driving into it? It was very strange. This happened last summer. I was driving home from work one night. I often work all kinds of different hours, and on this night in particular, had worked very late. I left at probably about 2:30 in the morning, and the drive back home usually took about 20 minutes. So by this time of night, the roads were very quiet. After getting off of the highway about 5 minutes into the drive, I didn't see any other cars for a while. But I remember that I came around a turn, and a very short time later, I saw these headlights behind me. I could tell that it was a larger vehicle, like maybe a truck, but I didn't think too much of it. So I kept driving down the road, and eventually I had to turn. I remember that when I made this turn, the vehicle behind me did as well. But not only did it turn with me, but right after the turn, it increased its speed. Now the vehicle was much closer to me than before. We were the only two vehicles out on the road at this time. As it got closer, I started to hear like a kind of music. I remember that after a couple of minutes, I rolled down my window slightly. That's when I realized that this truck behind me was an ice cream truck, and it was playing the ice cream truck music. This seemed really strange. Why would an ice cream truck be out driving at almost 3 o'clock in the morning and playing the music? I kept going, with the truck driving right behind me. Eventually, I had to turn again. When I did, the truck behind me turned as well. After going around the turn, I was able to see that it was in fact an ice cream truck. The closer that I got to my house, the more confused I was. But the truck ended up following me all the way to my street. Then I went down my street and I pulled into the driveway. The truck did not pull in after me, but instead it kept going a little bit farther. Then it stopped, basically in the middle of the street, sort of in front of my house. I quickly got out of my car and then went inside. After I got in the house, I looked out of the window. The ice cream truck was still there, sitting in the middle of the road. I could sort of hear the music playing, just barely. I watched the truck stay there for about 5 minutes. I was literally about to call the police on it because it was very suspicious, but then it just started driving away. I was so glad to see it gone now. I thought that was the end of it. However, it wasn't. The next night, I did not have to work nearly so late. I wasn't followed home or anything, and I was able to be in bed by midnight. However, I remember after laying down and closing my eyes, before I could fall asleep, I heard this sound. It was coming from outside, and I could just barely hear it. Then I realized it was the music from the ice cream truck. I went over to my window and looked outside. There, I saw the same ice cream truck, very slowly driving down the street. It was probably traveling at about 5 miles per hour or less. I couldn't believe it. This guy came back to my street. I watched the truck very slowly drive away and go out of sight. It took me a while to fall asleep after that, but the truck didn't return. After that, I never saw or heard it again. Looking back, it's still very confusing to me. I mean, why was there an ice cream truck driving around on the quiet roads at 3 a.m. anyways? And why did it follow me to my house? Then it came back to my street the very next night. I still don't have answers, but I'm just glad that I never saw it again after that. This is something that happened when I was 11 years old. It was a warm summer day, and I was outside of our house in the front yard. I don't remember the exact time, but I would guess maybe 6 or 7 p.m. I remember that there was this kid named Mikey who lived on my street. Our neighborhood was very large. There were many streets, and each of them had a bunch of houses. So there were a few kids that I was friends with who lived nearby. I remember that I saw Mikey walking down the street, and when he saw me, he waved. Then he approached me in the front of our yard. I remember that Mikey then told me that there was an ice cream truck in the neighborhood. Obviously, on such a hot day, I wanted to go and find it. So Mikey told me to follow him, and he said that it was just one street over. Mikey told me that his friend who lived on that street told him about it. So I remember that we set out and started walking to the end of our street to then go to the next one over. Well, when we got to that street, the ice cream truck was no longer there. We figured that it was just driving around, and Mikey's friend was on the street and told us that he thought it went to the next street over. We realized that the truck would probably still be close by, so we decided to go there. I remember that we went to the next street over from that, but things weren't as simple as they sound. The neighborhood streets were not all the same. Some were a little curved or slanted. Some were also longer than others, and there were occasionally small parks and things like that. So we ended up getting confused pretty easily. After not seeing the ice cream truck on the next street over, we thought that it still might be close by and kind of wandered around a couple of streets. I had never really been over there before, and I kind of thought that Mikey knew where we were going, but apparently not, because after walking for like 10 minutes, Mikey said that we were lost, and there was no ice cream truck in sight. So I said that we should probably head back, and Mikey agreed. However, we did not know what direction was the right way. Naturally, we tried to just go back the way that we had come from, but then we made a wrong turn somewhere. We were probably just walking farther in the wrong direction, and neither of us had cell phones or anything like that. So after walking for what felt like a really long time, we were still not quite sure as to where we were, and we never even found the ice cream truck. Then, after coming around the corner to this one street, I noticed a kid in the front yard of one of the houses. I didn't recognize him, but Mikey did. When we saw him, Mikey shouted hi to the kid, and the kid started waving us over. We went into the front yard, and Mikey started talking to this kid. I don't remember what about, but I was not really a part of the conversation. I was a pretty shy kid back then, and they were not including me on the conversation. It was as if I wasn't even there. Then, all of a sudden, the kid invited Mikey inside, and they started walking away from me. I was 90% sure that I wasn't invited to go into the house, but I didn't know what to do, so I kind of started to follow them. Then Mikey turned to me and said, "See you later, man," and that made it clear to me that I couldn't go in. They walked into the kid's garage, and then they went into his house through another door. I stood there in the driveway. What I should have done is yelled to him, "Wait, so you're just going to leave me here? You know that I don't know how to get home." I should have at least gone to the house and asked the kid's parents to call my parents, but that just didn't come to my mind. I was a shy 11-year-old kid. Instead, I walked out of the driveway and back onto this random street. By now, the sun was actually starting to set. I was mad at Mikey and angrily walked down the street for a while, but I still had no idea as to where I was. As I kept walking down random streets hoping to see something familiar, it slowly got darker and darker outside. I wasn't really seeing anybody else outside at all. As I walked down one street in particular, though, I came around a corner and this one guy stepped out from behind a parked car. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt. After I sort of passed him by, I noticed him start to walk after me. He was kind of a long ways back, but I did notice he walked to the end of the street when I did. When I got to the next one over, he was still there. The distance between us was at least 50 feet. I kept walking to the end of the next street, and the man was still there. But then I saw something that was finally familiar to me. It was a busier street that was connected to the one that I lived off of. I would just have to follow that to my street. When I got there, I started to walk along the sidewalk. I noticed that the man was still there, and he was the same distance back, and he was now walking down the sidewalk too. I did feel a little better here though, because occasionally a car would pass by on the road. I finally realized where I was, and I knew that my street was coming up on the left. Finally, I saw it. As soon as I reached my street, I just started sprinting. I ran as fast as I could, and I didn't bother to see if the guy walking behind me would chase after me or anything. I was able to get to my house, and then I ran inside. It felt amazing to finally be back home. After that, I was really mad at Mikey. I didn't talk to him for weeks. We were never really that close of friends, but that was a terrible thing that he did. I'm happy that I was able to find my way back home that night. For a little bit of background to this story, I'm a female, and this happened when I was 12. I lived in this quiet residential neighborhood with my parents, and there was this park at the end of the street that we lived on. During the summers, almost every morning, I would walk my dog down to the park. My dog's name was Max, and he had lots of energy. It seemed like he could run for hours without getting tired. So luckily for me, the park that we went to was usually empty, and I would always let him run around for a while. Well, one morning, we went for our walk like usual. The street was quiet, and Max and I arrived at the park at the usual time. I remember that as he was running around, I noticed an ice cream truck going down the street. As it drove by, it stopped just in front of where the road turned. I could sort of see it between some trees. It seemed like an odd place for the ice cream truck to stop. I just kept my eye on it, and the truck sat there for a little while. I couldn't really tell who was driving, but it didn't stop and open up to sell ice cream. After that, I decided to stop looking at it, and I focused my attention back on Max. A while later, though, I noticed that the truck was still there. I stayed at the park for maybe 30 minutes, and then finally went to leave. When I did, I noticed then that the truck was now gone. I would have had to walk sort of in front of it to go home. So the next day, I went back to the park at around the same time. Once again, it was just me and Max there. This time, I noticed the ice cream truck again. It didn't stop though, but drove by very slowly. After that, I didn't see it for the rest of the day. But the following day after that, I saw it again. I was at the park again with Max, just like usual. This time, I saw the truck approaching, and then it parked in the same spot as before. After the truck parked, for a while, nothing happened. Then I actually noticed a guy getting out. But what happened next was very strange. He walked down the street a little, and then appeared to go in a neighbor's yard. After that, he went completely out of my sight. But several minutes later, I noticed the man again. He was entering the park that I was in from the opposite side. This would have been the complete other side from the one that his truck was parked on. When I saw the man, he was walking straight for me. After getting within maybe 20 feet, he said hi to me. I was sitting on a park bench, and I had Max on a leash. The guy started asking me questions about Max and stuff. He was pretty nice, but then the guy asked me if I needed a ride home, which seemed strange. Of course, I said no to him. He stayed there and continued talking to me. Then the man said that he too had a dog, and wanted to know if I wanted to see it. I said no thanks, wondering how that would even be possible. Then I got up and said that I had to be getting home. We started to walk away from the man. I would have had to go by his ice cream truck, and he started to walk after me. I didn't look behind me, but I could sense him walking. At one point, about halfway out of the park, Max turned and started barking at the guy. I didn't look. We just kept going. Soon, we made it back out into the street. Then I heard the guy cross over. I glanced back and saw him getting into his ice cream truck. Max and I jogged the rest of the way back home, and we were able to make it. Moments after arriving in the front yard, I saw the ice cream truck approaching down the street. I ran and I hid behind my parents' car in the driveway. The ice cream truck drove by extremely slow, but I was confident that the man couldn't see me. Then I went inside. After that, I took a break from walking Max in the morning. Instead, we just let him run around our backyard for exercise. Eventually, though, I did go back, and I never saw that man again, luckily, or his ice cream truck. This is something that happened back when I was a kid. I was about 8 or 9, and back then, I used to play out in the street with my friends. During the summertime, most of the neighborhood kids would all hang out. I remember that we would all have to go inside by sunset typically. So one evening, I was on my street, a ways down from my house. I was hanging out with about 3 or 4 other kids who lived nearby. I don't remember exactly what we were doing, but I know that the sun was starting to set. After a little while, 2 of the other kids had to go, and I was thinking that I should probably go back soon as well. However, I did not immediately go inside. Instead, it was me and these other 2 kids who were still in the street talking. We were a ways down from my house, and normally the street would be really quiet and not very many cars would drive down it. I remember though, that right when it was really starting to get dark out, we saw this truck enter the street from the other end. We moved over to the side of the road and noticed that the truck was going very slow. Soon, we saw that it was an ice cream truck. It was also playing the typical ice cream truck music, except it was very quiet. The volume must have been turned almost all the way down. So as the truck approached, I personally had mixed feelings. I was always happy to see an ice cream truck in the summer, but something felt odd about it driving at basically nighttime with the volume so low. The 3 of us kids remained on the side of the street, and we were going to let the truck pass. I realized that most likely the truck wasn't going to sell ice cream at this hour. Except when the truck got close to us, it started to slow down even more. Then it stopped. The 3 of us just continued to stand there, now staring at this ice cream truck in the road. The truck just sat there running for what felt like a long time. I was really curious about this situation. Then, finally, the driver's door slid open. A man stepped out and said hi to us. We said hi back to him. The man then asked us if we wanted some ice cream. He said that it was the end of the day and he had some leftover that we could have for free. This sounded good and I was quick to say yes, but then the man told us to go ahead and get inside of his truck. He moved back and was going to open the back door, and that's when I had a sort of bad feeling about it. There was just a bit of suspicion that I probably shouldn't be going inside of the truck. The other 2 kids started to walk over, and I didn't know what to do, so I just started following them. I was telling myself that nothing bad would happen, but I remembered that as we made it around to the back, and this guy was standing there just inside of the truck, I heard my sister's voice. I looked over, and my house was probably like 100 feet down the street. My older sister was yelling at me to come inside, because I wasn't supposed to be out past dark. When I saw her, she was standing at the edge of our yard. Then she seemed to notice the ice cream truck and stuff. My sister would have been about 15 at the time, so a lot older and more mature than me. She asked what was going on and started to walk closer. That's when the ice cream man suddenly closed the back door to the truck. The other kids that I was with took off running in the other direction to go back to their houses. It all happened so fast. My sister then started yelling at me to get away from the truck. All 3 of us kids then ran away. Meanwhile, within seconds it seemed, the ice cream truck quickly started driving off. I got back to our house, and my friends went back to theirs. I then went inside, and my sister told my parents about what happened. They didn't let me leave the front yard without supervision for a few weeks after that, but I learned my lesson. After that though, I was always suspicious when I saw an ice cream truck.